St. Francois County, Missouri, September 2nd, 1891. Early morning, the mine still quiet. Edward Harris was 33 years old and had been underground in the St. Francois Iron Range since he was 17. He was a second crew miner on the Consolidated Iron Works No. 3, which meant he worked the shift that came on after the night crew cleared and found the face in whatever condition the night crew had left it. Sometimes productive, sometimes stubborn, always with the particular smell of blasted rock that settled into a man's clothes so thoroughly that no amount of washing fully removed it. He was lean in the way of iron miners, who used different muscles than coal miners and developed a different economy of effort, and he had the miner's characteristic assessment of everything underground as either a source of yield or a source of danger, with very little in between. He had not been present for the discovery of August 17th. He was not on Heinrich Vogel's crew. He learned about the chamber the same way most of the No. 3's workers learned about it, in fragments, through the particular communication network of a mine where men talk underground and information moves faster than management prefers. What Edward Harris did on the morning of September 2nd, 1891, was something that 14 days of underground rumor had persuaded him to attempt. He arrived at his shift an hour early, went underground before the shift manager had come down, and made his way to the sealed entry of the Eastern Gallery extension, where the granite fitting had been closed and the timber barrier installed. He had been told, by men he trusted, that the chamber behind the fitting had contained objects on the chests of the figures inside. He had been told that one member of the discovery crew, he did not know which one, had picked one up and put it back. He had been told the objects were gone now, removed by the federal representatives who had been at the mine 10 days earlier. He had been told these things at a depth of 310 feet, in the darkness and the noise of working faces, and he had believed them because the men who told him were the kind of men who did not invent things underground. But he had also heard something else. Something that the official account of what happened at the No. 3 in August and September 1891 does not record. He had heard that one of the discovery crew, not the crew member who picked up the disc and replaced it, but a different man, working alone in the chamber for a few minutes before the others entered, had taken something and not replaced it. Had wrapped it in his wool shirt and worked it under his belt and carried it out of the mine on his own body, and said nothing about it to anyone. But here is what the Missouri Bureau of Mines has spent 133 years making sure you never ask about. The man who carried the disc out of the chamber on August 17, 1891, was Edward Harris himself. He had been told this by the man who had done it, directly, in the particular privacy that mine work creates between men who trust each other. The man who told him was a timber setter named Patrick Gerity, 40 years old, Irish, who had been on Vogel's crew not as one of the original discovery party, but as a crew member who entered the chamber during the second crew visit on the morning of August 18th, before Superintendent Barth arrived. Gerity had seen the discs on the chests of the 11 figures. He had seen Hartley pick one up and replace it. He had watched the room for 4 minutes while the other crew members examined the figures and the walls. And in those 4 minutes, he had picked up one disc from the figure at the far end of the chamber's north wall, tucked it under his belt against the small of his back, pulled his wool shirt over it, and walked out of the chamber with 11 pounds of gray metal pressed against his spine. Gerity told Harris about the disc on August 25, 1891, 8 days after the discovery and 1 day after Edward Chalmers had left the mine with the leather case. He told Harris because he needed to tell someone, and because Harris was the man in the No. 3 whose judgment he trusted. He showed Harris the disc in the boarding house room they shared in Flat River, Missouri. Harris held it for 20 minutes. The disc was 8 inches in diameter. The thickness was approximately ½ an inch. The edges were clean, no bevel, no burr, as though cut from a larger piece by a tool that left no trace. The surface was gray, not the gray of oxidized iron, not the gray of tarnished silver. A gray that was the same at the center of the face as at the edge, with no tonal variation, as though the color were a property of the material rather than of its surface condition. Harris struck the face with his thumb knuckle, in the way he had learned to assess the composition of ore. The sound was wrong. Not the flat note of iron, not the slightly brighter note of copper, but a dense, absorbed tone that he associated with nothing he had struck underground before. He pressed the edge against the palm of his hand. The edge was sharp, not a cutting edge, but a clean edge that registered against skin. He did not apply force. He held the disc by its face and looked at it in the boarding house lamp, and could not account for what he was looking at. Patrick Gerity kept the disc. He did not know what to do with it, and Harris did not know what to tell him. They agreed to say nothing. Gerity wrapped it back in the wool shirt and stored it in his trunk. He left the Consolidated Iron Works No. 3 when the mine closed in September 1891 and moved to the lead mining operations at Joplin, Missouri, carrying the trunk and the disc. He worked in Joplin for 4 years and then moved to Bisbee, Arizona, and then to a series of mining towns across the Southwest in the pattern of a man following work through the declining years of the Western mining boom. He carried the trunk, and the trunk carried the disc. Edward Harris lost track of Gerity for years. He received a letter in 1898 from a forwarding address in Tucson that indicated Gerity was in New Mexico. He received another in 1902 from a San Francisco address that indicated Gerity had given up mining and was doing dock work. The San Francisco letter contained a single sentence about the disc. "It does not change. I have had a carbide drilled to it, and it shows no mark. I don't know what it is." A carbide drill. In 1902, a tungsten carbide drill bit was the hardest tool available in practical industrial use. Carbide drills were used for penetrating the hardest rock encountered in mining operations, the same rock that wore out steel in hours. A carbide drill that shows no mark on a surface is a surface harder than the hardest rock. Patrick Gerity, a 41-year-old dock worker in San Francisco in 1902, had applied the hardest practical tool available to him and found no mark. He had held the disc for 11 years. He had carried it across 5 states. It had not changed. He wrote that in his letter because he thought Harris should know. Harris kept the letter. It is in the Harris family papers, donated to the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis in 1947 by his son Richard Harris, under the designation Harris Family Correspondence, Box 3. The letter is 4 pages, and 3 pages discuss family and work conditions in San Francisco. The 4th page contains the disc reference. The Missouri Historical Society's finding aid for the Harris collection does not reference the 4th page or the disc. The box is accessible to researchers through the standard collections request process. No researcher has cited the Gerity letter in any published work. Patrick Gerity wrote one more letter to Harris in 1907 from a return address in Portland, Oregon. The letter is also in the Harris family papers in the same box. It is 2 pages. The first page is routine correspondence. The second page contains the last documented record of what became of the disc from the St. Francois County Chamber. Gerity writes that he has sold it. He sold it to a man in Portland whose name he gives as a dealer in mining curiosities and unusual objects, a category of professional that existed in the Pacific Northwest in the early 20th century as a side business to the mining supply trade. He does not give the dealer's full name. He gives a street address on Burnside Street in Portland. He writes that he sold it because he needed the money and because he had carried the thing for 16 years and had never known what to do with it and had grown tired of not knowing. He writes that the dealer paid him $40 for it and seemed to know what he was looking at, which Gerity found alarming in a way he could not fully articulate. He ends the letter by telling Harris that he hopes he has not done something wrong. He does not say what he means by wrong. The Portland dealer on Burnside Street has not been identified through any city directory or business registry search. The disc, after leaving Gerity's possession in 1907, enters no documented record. $40 in 1907 was a meaningful sum, approximately 2 weeks' wages for a laboring man. A dealer who paid $40 for an unidentified object and seemed to know what he was looking at was a dealer with prior knowledge of the object type or with institutional connections that made identification possible. What the Portland dealer did with the disc Whether he sold it, donated it, or delivered it to an institutional buyer is not established by any record that has been located. The Burnside Street address in Portland is today a commercial block. No antique or curiosity dealership operating at that address in 1907 appears in the Oregon Historical Society's business records for that period. The disc is in no accessible catalog. What the Carbide drill test established in 1902 is the most significant physical datum in the entire St. Francois County case, because it is the only reported test of the disc material conducted by someone holding an actual specimen rather than describing one from memory. A surface that shows no mark from a tungsten carbide drill bit has a hardness exceeding the hardest practical industrial tool available in 1902. In the Mohs hardness scale, tungsten carbide measures at approximately 9 to 9.5. A surface that resists it without marking must approach or exceed diamond hardness, the hardest naturally occurring substance known. No pre-Columbian North American metallurgical tradition produced an alloy or compound approaching diamond hardness. The closest material with documented hardness in this range is a class of ceramic matrix composites developed for aerospace and military applications in the second half of the 20th century. Patrick Gerity had a piece of it pressed against his spine for 11 years. He sold it for $40 on Burnside Street in Portland in 1907. The dealer seemed to know what he was looking at. Gerity hoped he had not done something wrong. The St. Francois County chamber is sealed behind the concrete the Consolidated Ironworks poured in September 1891. The 10 remaining discs, the 10 that did not leave on Patrick Gerity's body on August 18th, and the 10 that left in the institutional leather case on August 23rd, are accounted for only by the absence of a record. The 10 in the leather case are in the Bureau of American Ethnology's custody without an accession entry. The one that Gerity took is in the possession of whoever the Portland dealer sold it to, or whoever that buyer's heir sold it to, in an unbroken chain of private ownership that the $40 on Burnside Street initiated in 1907, and that has produced no subsequent documented transaction. The chamber is sealed. The 11 figures are standing in the north wall. Each chest is empty. The Harris family papers are in the Missouri Historical Society. The Gerity letter is in Box 3. The carbide drill showed no mark. Edward Harris was 33 years old when Patrick Gerity pressed the disc into his hands in a boarding house room in Flat River, Missouri, in August 1891. And he held it for 20 minutes and could not account for what he was looking at. He carried that uncertainty for the rest of his life, and it is in the Harris family papers, in the 4th page of the San Francisco letter, in the single sentence Gerity wrote to tell him what the hardest drill had done to the surface that had come out of the chamber at 310 feet. The significance of Patrick Gerity's 11-year custody of the disc lies not only in the carbide drill test, but in the period of observation it permitted. 11 years of daily proximity to an object allows a kind of knowledge that a brief laboratory examination does not. Gerity carried the disc through 5 states, through the full range of climatic conditions available in the continental United States: Missouri winters, Arizona summers, the salt air of the San Francisco waterfront, the damp cold of Pacific Northwest winters. In the 1902 letter, he writes that it does not change. Not that it has not changed during his custody, but that it does not change, present tense, an ongoing condition, a property of the material itself. A metal object that shows no change in surface condition after 11 years of exposure to humidity ranges from the dry southwest to the wet Pacific Northwest after contact with mine dust, salt air, sweat, and the various chemical environments of 5 different mining operations. Detritus is a metal object with a surface chemistry that does not interact with standard atmospheric corrosion mechanisms. Galvanic corrosion, oxidation, sulfidation, the 3 primary corrosion mechanisms for metal surfaces in variable environmental conditions, apparently produced no effect on the surface of an 8-inch gray disc that Patrick Gerity had pressed against his spine for 11 years. This matches and extends the observation that Edward Chalmers made when he entered the chamber on August 21, 1891, and found 11 discs that had been in a sealed stone chamber for a minimum of several thousand years without showing the surface oxidation that any documented metal alloy would show after that period. The same surface chemistry that prevented change over thousands of years in the sealed chamber also prevented change over 11 years in Patrick Gerity's trunk. It is a consistent property, documented across 2 independent observation periods by 2 independent observers. One observer is in the Bureau of American Ethnology's travel record without a corresponding field report. The other is in Box 3 of the Harris collection at the Missouri Historical Society, in 4 pages of a letter postmarked San Francisco, 1902. The Burnside Street address that Gerity provided in his 1907 Portland letter is located in a block that was, in the early 20th century, part of Portland's commercial district adjacent to the Old Town neighborhood. The area housed a mix of retail and wholesale operations serving the mining and shipping industries that dominated Portland's early 20th century economy. A dealer in mining curiosities and unusual objects at a Burnside Street address in 1907 would have had natural commercial connections to both the active mining industry in the Pacific Northwest and to the institutional collectors, museum procurement agents, university natural history departments, federal survey contractors, who were actively building collections of Western material in that period. A dealer who paid $40 for an object he seemed to know and said nothing further to Gerity about its identity is a dealer with prior knowledge of the object type, which means the disc was not the first such object this dealer had encountered. It was a type whose market he knew. The market for gray discs from sealed pre-Columbian stone chambers in the Missouri Iron Range is not a market whose records are accessible through any publicly documented source. It is a market whose existence is documented by a single letter in Box 3 of a donation to the Missouri Historical Society in 1947. And by the $40 that changed hands on Burnside Street in 1907. Edward Harris died in St. Francois County in 1929. He was 71 years old. His son Richard Harris donated the family papers to the Missouri Historical Society 18 years after his father's death. The donation inventory, on file at the Society's Collections Management Office, lists the Harris correspondence files by date range without identifying any specific letter's contents. The Gerity correspondence is in Box 3, alongside letters from other mine workers, family members, and a local bank. Nothing in the donation inventory identifies the Gerity letters as relating to the St. Francois County discovery of 1891 or to a disc from a sealed chamber at 310 feet. A researcher who opens Box 3 and works through the correspondence file will find 4 pages of dock work and family news, and then 1 sentence about a carbide drill and a surface that showed no mark. That sentence is the only above-ground record of what Patrick Gerity knew about the material from the chamber at the number 3. Written in 1902, sealed in an envelope, mailed from San Francisco to Missouri, kept in a trunk for 45 years, and donated to an archive in 1947, where it has been waiting since for someone to open Box 3 and read to the 4th page. The Missouri Historical Society is in St. Louis. The Harris family papers are accessible to researchers by appointment. Box 3 is in the collection. The 4th page of the San Francisco letter describes a gray disc 8 inches in diameter, half an inch thick, with no mark from a tungsten carbide drill. Patrick Gerity wrote that it does not change. He was right. The material does not change. It has been in some form of custody since August 18, 1891, for the 11 years it spent in Gerity's trunk, for whatever time it spent in the Portland dealer's possession, for whatever chain of private or institutional custody has held it since 1907. And it has not changed, because the property that makes it not change was built into the material at whatever point in whatever manufacturing process produced it, in whatever civilization had the knowledge to produce it, in whatever period that civilization was active before the Iron Range of St. Francois County was sealed over them. The disc is in that darkness now, wherever that darkness is, still gray, still clean-edged, still absorbing whatever light falls on it and not giving it back. The mine itself, in the 90 years after the No. 3's closure, became what sealed mine properties become in the American Midwest. A parcel of rough land with a capped shaft, a cleared surface where the facility stood, and second-growth forest reclaiming the rest. The St. Francois Land and Mineral Company, which acquired the property in February 1892, had no commercial use for it then, and has had no commercial use for it in the century and more since. Its Wilmington registered agent renews the state filing annually. The property taxes are paid. The land sits. 220 acres of St. Francois County iron country, gate accessed from the county road, carrying at 310 feet the sealed chamber that 11 figures have occupied in military formation since before the iron range above them was discovered, let alone mined. The chamber carries the wall inscriptions that Luther Crane described as a writing he had never seen. The chamber carries the floor, still level and dressed, still without the discs that left on 2 separate days in August 1891. One set in a leather case, one set against the small of a timber setter's back. The chamber carries the particular smell that Heinrich Vogel could not wash from his hands after 3 washings. The chamber carries the sealed air that has not circulated since Vogel's crew first opened the latch. Edward Harris held the disc for 20 minutes in a boarding house room in Flat River in August 1891 and could not account for what he was looking at. 48 years later, in the last year of his life, he told his son Richard that the disc was the only thing he had ever touched underground that he was certain had been made by someone who understood something about material that no one in the world of 1891 understood. He said this not to make a claim about lost civilizations. He said it as an assessment of material properties in the language of a man who had spent 50 years underground assessing material properties. He held the disc for 20 minutes. The carbide drill showed no mark. Patrick Gerity sold it for $40. It is somewhere in the chain of private and institutional transactions that began on Burnside Street in Portland in 1907. Edward Harris's assessment of what it was made of is in the Harris family papers in what his son Richard wrote down after his father's death, in the same box 3 as the Gerity letters. The disc is not in box 3. It is in the darkness of wherever it went after the $40 changed hands, still gray, still clean-edged, still showing no mark from the hardest tool that Patrick Gerity could put to it. There is a final element of the Gerity account that the available documentation does not resolve, but that the physical logic of the case raises. Patrick Gerity entered the chamber on the morning of August 18, 1891, before the Frick Coke superintendent arrived and restricted access. He had approximately 4 minutes inside the chamber, during which he examined the figures, observed Hartley pick up and replace a disc, and made his own decision about what to take and what to leave. In 4 minutes, with the lamplight limited to what the crew's standard equipment produced, he selected one specific disc from one specific figure, the figure at the far end of the north wall. He selected that figure and that disc in preference to any of the other 10 figures and their discs. He chose the far end of the north wall. He did not choose randomly, or if he chose randomly, the randomness produced the far end of the wall position. Why that position, and not a more accessible one near the chamber entry, is a question the account does not answer. The figure at the far end of the north wall was the one Gerity described, in his conversation with Harris on August 25, as the tall one. The tall figure. In a chamber of 11 figures standing in military formation, each between 10 and 12 feet tall, one was distinguished by height in the account of a man who had 4 minutes inside the chamber and chose to take the disc from that one specifically. What distinguished the tall figure from the others, whether in bearing, in position, in some characteristic of the disc itself that Gerity perceived in 4 minutes of lamplight, is not in any record. The disc from the tall figure at the far end of the north wall is in Portland, or wherever the Burnside Street chain led after 1907, in whatever darkness has held it since. $40 changed hands. The dealer seemed to know what he was looking at. The disc does not change. Edward Harris was 33 years old when he held it in a boarding house room in Missouri and could not account for what he was holding. He never held it again. The Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis is open to the public Tuesday through Sunday. The Harris family papers are in the collection storage, accessible by researcher appointment. Box 3 of the Harris Correspondence Series contains the letters from Patrick Gerity, postmarked 1898, 1902, and 1907. The 1902 letter is 4 pages. The 4th page ends with one sentence about a carbide drill and a surface that showed no mark. The 1907 letter is 2 pages. The 2nd page names a Burnside Street dealer and a price of $40 and the observation that the dealer seemed to know what he was looking at, and the question of whether selling it was something wrong. None of this is in the Missouri Historical Society's finding aid for the Harris papers. The finding aid describes the collection as correspondence and personal papers of a St. Francois County mining family, late 19th and early 20th century. The disc, as a physical object, has not been in Missouri since 1891 and was not in Missouri when the papers were donated in 1947. The papers are the only evidence that it existed outside the sealed chamber at the number 3. The chamber is sealed. The disc is gone. Patrick Gerity hoped he had not done something wrong. He held it for 16 years and sold it for $40 and never mentioned it to anyone else. And he died somewhere in the American West in circumstances that the available record does not document. And the one sentence in the 4th page of the 1902 letter is the last documented evidence that an 8-inch gray disc from St. Francois County, Missouri, whose surface showed no mark from a tungsten carbide drill, was ever in any human hand after August 18, 18